When Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo in 1815, one man in London already knew the outcome before anyone else in the city. His name was Nathan Rothschild. He received the information through a private courier network that his family had spent decades building, a system faster and more reliable than any government communication of the era. He knew Napoleon had lost. London did not. What he did with that information in the next 12 hours became one of the most documented and most deliberately obscured stories in financial history. He did not celebrate. He did not tell anyone. He walked onto the floor of the London Stock Exchange and he sold. He sold British government bonds aggressively, visibly, publicly, while every other investor watched. If Nathan Rothschild was selling, the rumor spread instantly. It must mean Britain had lost. Panic followed. Bond prices collapsed. And then, at the bottom of the market, when prices had fallen as far as fear could push them, he bought. He bought everything. When the news of Wellington's victory finally reached London and bond prices soared, Nathan Rothschild had multiplied his family's fortune by a factor that historians still debate but agree was extraordinary. He had not broken a single law. He had simply known, earlier than anyone else, in a world where information was the rarest commodity, what had happened. This is the story of how the Rothschild family built an empire, not with armies, not with conquest, not with political office, with information, with timing, with a network that spanned 5 countries before modern telecommunications existed, and with a willingness to do business with anyone on any side of any conflict as long as the numbers worked.
The Rothschild story begins not in a banking vault, but in a single room. Frankfurt, Germany, 1744. Mayer Amschel Rothschild was born in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt, a walled enclosure where the city's Jewish population was legally confined, prohibited from owning land, prohibited from most professions, subject to a curfew, and taxed specifically for the right to breathe the city's air. From these conditions, which were not unusual for Jewish families in 18th century Europe, Mayer Amschel built something that had never existed before: a pan-European banking network controlled by a single family. He began as a coin dealer, trading rare coins with local nobility, and eventually catching the attention of the Landgrave of Hesse-Kassel, one of the wealthiest princes in German-speaking Europe. The Landgrave entrusted Mayer Amschel with managing portions of his fortune, including, significantly, the management of money earned from renting Hessian soldiers to the British Crown during the American Revolutionary War. American soldiers in 1776 were fighting men whose wages were flowing through a Frankfurt coin dealer named Rothschild. This was not the last time the family would find itself at the intersection of American history and European finance. Mayer Amschel had 10 children. 5 of his sons he placed with calculated precision into 5 of the most important financial capitals in Europe: Amschel in Frankfurt, Solomon in Vienna, Nathan in London, Kalman in Naples, James in Paris. 5 brothers, 5 cities, 5 banking houses, 1 family. 1 coordination network conducted through private couriers in a private code, faster than any government postal system of the era. For the first time in history, a single family had the ability to move capital across national borders, across competing governments, across warring nations, with a speed and coordination that no state actor could match. And they used it. When the Napoleonic Wars consumed Europe from 1803 to 1815, the Rothschilds financed multiple sides of the conflict simultaneously.
Nathan, in London, arranged British government loans to fund Wellington's campaigns. James, in Paris, maintained relationships, carefully, quietly, with French financial interests. The family was not loyal to any nation, it was loyal to the network. And the network needed wars to function, because wars create desperate governments, and desperate governments pay extraordinary interest rates to anyone willing to lend.
I want to be precise about something. The Rothschild family is one of the most discussed and most distorted subjects in modern history. They have been the target of genuine anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that attribute to them powers and intentions that are fabricated, that are rooted in centuries of European prejudice, and that have been used to justify genuine historical atrocities. I am not telling that story. What I am telling is different, and it is documented. The documented story, the one that lives in banking records, government archives, congressional reports, and the family's own published histories, is the story of a real institution, a real network, a real concentration of financial power that operated across national borders for over 2 centuries. That story is remarkable enough. It does not require exaggeration, and it connects directly, specifically, documentably to every institution we have examined in this series. By the mid-19th century, the Rothschild network had financed the British government's purchase of the Suez Canal, had provided emergency loans to the Bank of England during financial crises that would otherwise have triggered systemic collapse, had financed the construction of railway networks across Europe and the Americas, including significant portions of American rail infrastructure in the decades after the Civil War, had provided personal loans to heads of state across the continent, creating relationships of financial dependence that translated directly into political influence. And, most significantly for the story we have been telling in this series, had established deep and lasting connections with the American financial establishment that was, in the early 20th century, beginning to construct the institutions we have already examined. Paul Warburg, the architect of the Federal Reserve System, whose fingerprints we found on every page of the Jekyll Island plan, had married into a banking family with deep Rothschild connections. His brother Felix had done the same. Jacob Schiff, the head of Kuhn Loeb & Company, one of the most powerful American investment banks of the early 20th century and a key participant in the same financial networks that produced the Federal Reserve, had spent years in the Frankfurt financial community that the Rothschilds had built. The network that gathered on Jekyll Island in 1910 to design the American central banking system was not separate from the European banking dynasties that had preceded it. It was their American chapter. The Federal Reserve was not designed to be independent of European financial influence. It was designed by men who were embedded in it. Now, the financing of wars. The Crimean War of the 1850s, Rothschild loans on multiple sides. The American Civil War, Rothschild-connected banking houses provided financing to both the Union and Confederate governments at various stages of the conflict. The Franco-Prussian War of 1870, James de Rothschild in Paris, navigating the financing of a conflict that ended with France paying a 5 billion franc indemnity, the management of which generated significant banking commissions. World War I, Rothschild-connected institutions were involved in war financing across multiple Allied governments. The pattern is not that the Rothschilds caused these wars. The pattern is that wars, regardless of their cause, create financing needs that centralized, internationally networked banking families are uniquely positioned to fulfill. And that fulfilling those needs on multiple sides is not conspiracy. It is rational financial behavior by an institution that has no national allegiance, only financial ones. Nathan Rothschild, the London branch patriarch, reportedly said that he cared nothing for which side won a war. He cared only about the paper it was written on. That quote may be apocryphal. The behavior it describes is thoroughly documented. Here is the connection that textbooks do not make. In 1910, on Jekyll Island, 7 men designed the Federal Reserve System. Among them, Paul Warburg, with his direct ties to European banking networks that the Rothschild dynasty had built over a century. In 1913, the Federal Reserve Act passed. In 1914, World War I began. The Federal Reserve, newly operational, provided the financial infrastructure that allowed the United States government to finance its eventual entry into the war and to extend significant credit to allied governments throughout the conflict. Without a central bank capable of managing war financing at scale, the American involvement in World War I looks structurally different. The men who designed the Federal Reserve in 1910 knew a war was coming. Some historians argue they knew more than that. What is documented, specifically and verifiably, is that the banking network that designed the Federal Reserve was embedded in the same European financial structures that had been financing wars for a century, and that the Federal Reserve's first major operational test was a world war. The Rothschild banking empire, in its classic 19th century form, no longer exists. The 5-branch family network that spanned Frankfurt, Vienna, London, Naples, and Paris was dismantled across the 20th century by wars, nationalization, and the destruction of the Frankfurt and Vienna branches under the Nazi regime, which seized Rothschild assets across Europe with a thoroughness that represented both the most extreme expression of the anti-Semitic mythology that had surrounded the family and a genuine attempt to eliminate a rival financial power. What remained after World War II was primarily the British branch, N.M. Rothschild and Sons, and the French branch, which merged in 2003 to form a unified Rothschild & Co., now headquartered in Paris and London. The modern institution is a mid-sized investment bank by contemporary standards, significant but not dominant in the way the 19th century network was dominant. What did not disappear was the network, the relationships, the institutional knowledge, the placement of family members and family-connected individuals in positions of influence across European and American financial governance. Evelyn de Rothschild served on the board of The Economist magazine for decades. Jacob Rothschild has served on multiple financial and cultural institutions with direct connections to the policy networks we have examined in this series. The family has attended and hosted events connected to the Bilderberg network. The pattern of a family that began in a Frankfurt ghetto and built within 3 generations a financial network that could move capital across warring nations faster than governments could communicate, that pattern does not simply dissolve because the formal banking structure changed. Networks survive institutions. Relationships outlast organizations. The architecture of influence built over 2 centuries does not require a single family name on a door to keep functioning.
Mayor Amschel Rothschild, the man who started all of this in a Frankfurt ghetto, reportedly said something to his sons before he died in 1812. He told them that as long as his sons worked together, no power on earth could harm them. He was not entirely wrong. But here is what the documented history of the Rothschild dynasty actually teaches us, stripped of mythology, stripped of prejudice, stripped of the conspiracy theories that have obscured the genuine story. It teaches us that financial power, concentrated and coordinated across national borders, operates outside the accountability structures that democratic governments are designed to provide. Not because of any single family, not because of any particular ethnicity or religion,
but because that is what concentrated, coordinated, internationally networked financial power does, regardless of who holds it. The Rothschilds built the first version of something. Jekyll Island built the American version. The Bank for International Settlements in Basel, which we examine in a future episode, built the version that currently sits above all national governments. The architecture evolves, the principle remains.
We began this series on a private island in November 1910. 7 men, 1 plan, 1 network. We have now traced that network back a full century further, to a single room in the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt, where a coin dealer looked at the structure of European power and decided to build something that governments could not control. What Mayor Amschel started, Nathan perfected at Waterloo. James extended across France, and the network ultimately carried into the American financial system through the men who sat around the table at Jekyll Island. The Federal Reserve was not a uniquely American invention. It was the American expression of a model that had been refined over a century of European war financing. In our next episode, we go inside an institution that has taken that model and elevated it to its logical endpoint. A bank that was founded in 1930, that operated throughout World War II doing business with Nazi Germany while Allied soldiers were dying, that answers to no government on Earth, that has diplomatic immunity from every legal jurisdiction on the planet, and that today coordinates the monetary policy of every major central bank, including the Federal Reserve, from a tower in Basel, Switzerland. You have heard of the Federal Reserve. You have never heard of the institution above it. That story, next episode.